The trading station called Nexus Prime floated in the dark space between three star systems. It was massive, almost like a small moon made of metal and glass. Thousands of aliens from dozens of worlds came here every day to trade, to talk, and to find work. Ships arrived and departed at all hours, carrying goods from one end of the galaxy to the other. Daniel Carter stepped off his cargo ship and walked into the main docking area. He was 42 years old, average height, with short brown hair that was starting to turn gray at the edges. He wore simple work clothes, nothing fancy. His boots were old but clean. He moved through the crowd without drawing attention. Just another face among thousands. He had delivered medical supplies to the station's hospital wing. Now he was waiting for his payment to clear so he could refuel and move on to his next job. It was simple work, hauling cargo from one place to another. It didn't pay much, but it was honest. And Daniel liked the quiet of space travel. The station was busy today. Aliens of all shapes and sizes walked past him. Some were tall and thin, others short and wide. Some had scales, others had fur, and a few had skin that changed colors as they moved. Daniel had seen many species during his years as a hauler. He found them interesting, but he kept his thoughts to himself. He had learned long ago that most aliens didn't think much of humans. He made his way to a cantina on the station's middle level. The place was crowded and loud. Aliens sat at tables, drinking strange liquids and talking in languages Daniel didn't understand. He found an empty seat at the bar and ordered something simple to eat. The bartender was a Celian, a species with 4 arms and smooth blue skin. His name was Torvak, and he had worked at this cantina for many years. He looked at Daniel with curious eyes as he prepared the food. "Human," Torvak said. "Don't see many of your kind here alone." Daniel nodded. "Just passing through." Torvak placed a plate of food in front of him. "Be careful. Some species here don't like humans much. They think your kind is weak." Daniel picked up his fork. "I've heard that before." He ate slowly, watching the room from the corner of his eye. He noticed a group of large reptilian aliens at a table near the center of the cantina. They were Varax, known across the galaxy for their size and aggression. Their scales were dark green, and their eyes glowed yellow in the dim light. They were laughing loudly and drinking heavily. The leader of the group was bigger than the others. His name was Kesseth, and he had scars across his face from old fights. He noticed Daniel sitting at the bar and pointed at him with a clawed finger. "Look at that," Kesseth said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "A human. A soft little creature from that wet rock called Earth." His friends laughed. Other aliens in the cantina turned to look. Daniel continued eating. He didn't look up. Kesseth stood and walked toward the bar. He was almost 3 meters tall, towering over Daniel. He stopped right beside the human and leaned down, his hot breath washing over Daniel's face. "I'm talking to you, prey animal," Kesseth growled. "On my world, we hunt creatures like you for sport. You're nothing but food with legs." Daniel chewed his food slowly. He swallowed, then spoke in a calm voice. "I'm just trying to eat my meal." Kesseth's eyes widened with anger. He grabbed Daniel's shoulder and shoved him off the stool. Daniel stumbled but didn't fall. He caught himself, straightened his clothes, and looked at the Varax without any expression on his face. The cantina went quiet. Everyone was watching now. "You don't even fight back," Kesseth laughed. "Pathetic. Your species is a joke. I don't know how you survived long enough to reach space." Daniel said nothing. He simply picked up his plate, moved to a different seat at the far end of the bar, and continued eating. The Varax laughed even harder. Other aliens shook their heads or whispered to each other about how weak humans were. Torvak watched Daniel with a strange look in his eyes, something like pity mixed with confusion. Daniel ignored all of it. He had dealt with aliens like Kesseth many times before. He knew that reacting would only make things worse. So he stayed quiet and finished his food. As he ate, he noticed something else. A small figure sat alone at a table in the corner. It was a young Melori, a species that looked similar to rabbits from Earth. They were small, gentle creatures, known for their kindness and their soft voices. This one was a girl, probably no more than 8 or 9 years old in human terms. She had light brown fur and big, frightened eyes. She was alone. No parents, no guardians. She looked scared. Daniel watched her for a moment. Then he stood up, took some food from his plate, and walked over to her table. He crouched down so he wasn't towering over her. "Hey there," he said softly. "Are you hungry?" The girl looked at him with wide eyes. She didn't speak, but she nodded slowly. Daniel placed the food in front of her. "It's okay. Go ahead and eat. I won't hurt you." The girl hesitated, then reached out and took a small bite. Her ears relaxed slightly, and she gave Daniel a tiny smile. "My name is Daniel," he said. "What's yours?" "Leary," she whispered. "That's a nice name. Are you here alone, Larry?" She nodded, her eyes sad. "My family. We got separated. I don't know where they are." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest. "Don't worry. We'll figure something out. You just stay close to me for now, okay?" Larry nodded again, looking a little less scared. Torvak watched this from the bar. He had seen many things in his long life, but something about this human surprised him. The same creature who had been pushed around and mocked was now gently caring for a frightened child. There was something strange about that, something Torvak couldn't quite understand. Before anyone could say another word, a loud alarm cut through the air. Red lights flashed across the cantina. The station's warning system blared a message in multiple languages. "Attention all residents. Lockdown initiated. Hostile forces have boarded the station. All civilians proceed to emergency shelters immediately." Panic erupted. Aliens screamed and ran in every direction. Tables were knocked over. Drinks spilled across the floor. The Varaks who had mocked Daniel pushed their way toward the exits, shoving smaller creatures aside without care. Torvak's face went pale. "Crethans," he whispered. "Crethan raiders." Daniel had heard of them. The Crethans were 8-legged hunters, famous across the galaxy for their brutality. They attacked stations and ships, taking prisoners to sell as slaves or to fight in their gladiator pits. No one wanted to face them. Leary grabbed Daniel's hand, her small body shaking with fear. Daniel looked down at her, then looked at the chaos around him. His expression didn't change. He squeezed her hand gently. "Stay close to me," he said quietly. He picked up his glass, finished his drink in one long sip, and set it down on the table. Then he stood up, calm as ever, and faced the direction of the screams. The station shook as explosions echoed through distant corridors. The Crethan raiders had breached multiple entry points, and they were moving fast. Their ships had latched onto Nexus Prime like parasites, cutting through the hull and releasing hunting parties into the station. Daniel moved through the panicked crowd with Leary's small hand in his. He didn't run. Running caused mistakes, and mistakes got people killed. Instead, he walked with purpose, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow, every possible threat. The main corridors were dangerous now. Too many people, too much chaos. The Crethans would target those areas first because that's where they would find the most prisoners. Daniel needed to get to the maintenance tunnels, the parts of the station that most people forgot about. He pulled Leary toward a service door marked with symbols that meant authorized personnel only. The door was locked, but Daniel had spent years hauling cargo through stations like this one. He knew how these systems worked. He pulled a small tool from his pocket and had the door open in seconds. "Come on," he said softly, guiding Leary inside. The maintenance corridor was narrow and dark, lit only by small emergency lights along the floor. Pipes and cables ran along the walls. It smelled like oil and metal, but it was quiet, and that's what mattered. They hadn't gone far when Daniel heard voices ahead. He held up his hand, signaling Leary to stop. They pressed against the wall and listened. Please, please don't hurt us." A voice begged. Daniel crept forward and looked around the corner. He saw a small group of aliens huddled together. He recognized Torvak, the bartender from the cantina. With him was an elderly Palaxan scientist with gray skin and kind eyes, and a Celian trader who was bleeding from a wound on her arm. Standing over them were 2 Crethan scouts. The Crethans were terrifying to look at. They had 8 legs, like giant spiders made of black armor. Their heads were flat and wide, with multiple red eyes that glowed in the darkness. They carried weapons that hummed with energy, and their voices clicked and hissed when they spoke. "More slaves for the pits," one of them said. "The masters will be pleased." Daniel watched them for a moment. He counted their weapons, noted their positions, and measured the distance between them and the civilians. Then he looked at the pipes running along the ceiling. He turned to Leary. "Stay here," he whispered. "Don't move until I come back for you." Leary's eyes went wide with fear, but she nodded. Daniel moved silently along the corridor, keeping to the shadows. He had spent his whole life learning how to move without being noticed. On Earth, humans had survived for thousands of years by being clever, not by being strong. They watched, they waited, and they struck when the time was right. He reached a control panel on the wall. It was connected to the station's environmental systems. Daniel studied it for a few seconds, then made his choice. He entered a command sequence and moved quickly away from the area. The Crethans were still threatening the civilians when the corridor suddenly vented. A section of the ceiling opened, and the air rushed out with violent force. The 2 Crethans, caught off guard, were pulled toward the breach. Their 8 legs scrambled for grip, but the suction was too strong. They were sucked into the vacuum beyond. Emergency seals activated automatically, closing the breach. The air stabilized. Daniel walked calmly into the corridor. The civilians stared at him with shock on their faces. "Is everyone okay?" he asked. Torvak's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Finally, he managed to speak. You did that? In just a few seconds?" Daniel shrugged. "I've been on a lot of stations. You learn things." He moved to the wounded Celian trader. Her name was Mira, and she was holding her bleeding arm against her body. Daniel examined the wound quickly. "It's not deep," he said, "but we need to stop the bleeding." He tore a strip of cloth from his shirt and wrapped it tightly around her arm. "That will hold for now." The elderly Palaxan scientist stepped forward. His name was Orvith, and he had studied species from across the galaxy for most of his life. He looked at Daniel with new eyes. "That was remarkable," Orvith said. "You planned that in seconds. You knew exactly what to do." Daniel helped Myra to her feet. "We need to keep moving. The Crethans will send more scouts when these 2 don't report back. Where can we go?" Torvak asked. "The whole station is under attack." "The lower decks," Daniel said. "Industrial areas. Lots of places to hide. Lots of tools we can use." He paused. "Someone needs to slow them down, or they'll capture everyone on this station." Orvith shook his head. "You can't be serious. You're one human. The Crethans have killed species far stronger than yours. They've conquered worlds." Daniel's expression didn't change. "My people have a saying. It's not the size of the predator that matters. It's the will to survive." He retrieved the weapons from the fallen Crethans and took their communication devices. He handed one weapon to Torvak. "Do you know how to use this?" Torvak looked at the weapon nervously. "I've never fired anything in my life." "Then stay behind me and protect the others." Daniel went back for Leary. The little Mallory girl ran to him and hugged his leg tightly. He patted her head gently. "You did good," he said. "You were very brave." They moved deeper into the station, following maintenance routes that Daniel had memorized from station maps. He had a habit of studying every place he visited. It was a survival instinct, something all humans learned from birth. As they walked, Leary looked up at him. "Are you scared?" she asked in her small voice. Daniel thought about the question. "A little," he admitted. But being scared doesn't mean you stop. It means you're paying attention. Myra limped along beside Orvith. She was watching Daniel with a confused expression. "I don't understand," she said. "In the cantina, you let that Varax push you around. You didn't fight back. I thought humans were cowards." "Fighting that Varax would have accomplished nothing," Daniel said without turning around. "He wasn't a threat. He was just loud. And the Crethans?" Orvith asked. Daniel stopped walking. He turned to face them, and for a moment, something changed in his eyes. The calm, quiet expression was still there, but beneath it was something harder. Something cold. "The Crethans are a threat," he said. "They hurt innocent people. They take children and sell them as slaves." He glanced at Leary, then back at the others. "That's different." Before anyone could respond, Daniel's stolen communicator crackled to life. A harsh voice spoke in the Crethan language, then repeated itself in common galactic speech. "Scouts 7 and 8, report your status. We're sending a squad to your position." Daniel looked at the communicator, then at the corridor ahead. He could see the squad approaching on a display screen nearby, 6 Crethans moving in formation. He handed Leary to Torvak. "Keep her safe. Find somewhere to hide and stay there until I come back." "What are you going to do?" Torvak asked, fear in his voice. Daniel didn't answer. He simply walked toward the approaching squad, disappearing into the shadows of the maintenance tunnels. Orvith watched him go with wide eyes. "What manner of creature is this human?" He whispered that none of them had an answer. The lower decks of Nexus Prime were dark and dangerous. This was where the station's power generators hummed, where chemical tanks stored hazardous materials, and where the artificial gravity system sometimes failed without warning. Most station residents avoided these areas. Daniel Carter used them as his hunting ground. He moved through the shadows like smoke, silent and patient. The 6 Crethans had entered the maintenance tunnels, expecting to find their missing scouts. Instead, they found darkness and silence. "Spread out," the squad leader ordered. "Find whoever did this." That was their first mistake. Daniel watched them separate from his hiding place behind a massive coolant pipe. He had already studied the area, identified every weapon at his disposal. The station itself would be his greatest tool. The first Crethan moved down a narrow corridor alone. Daniel followed him from above, crawling along maintenance beams that ran just beneath the ceiling. When the Crethan passed beneath him, Daniel dropped down and struck with precision. Not strength, precision. He hit the nerve cluster at the base of the creature's neck, the one weakness in their armor. The Crethan collapsed without a sound. 1 down. 5 to go. Daniel took the fallen hunter's weapon and moved on. He didn't stay in one place. Staying still meant death. His ancestors had learned that lesson thousands of years ago, running across the plains of Earth, outlasting prey that was faster and stronger until it collapsed from exhaustion. Humans were not built for power. They were built for endurance. The second Crethan died in a chemical storage room. Daniel had opened the tank of industrial solvent and waited. When the Crethan entered, Daniel sealed the door behind him. The creature had 30 seconds before the fumes overwhelmed it. The remaining 4 Crethans heard their comrades' screams through their communicators. They regrouped quickly, back to back, weapons raised. They were scared now. Daniel could see it in the way they moved, the way their red eyes darted to every shadow. Good. Fear made them predictable. He led them deeper into the station, leaving small traces for them to follow. A bloody handprint here, a discarded weapon there. They thought they were hunting him. They didn't realize they were being led. The cargo bay was a massive open space filled with shipping containers. The artificial gravity in this section was weak, a known problem that station engineers had never bothered to fix. Daniel had hauled cargo through this area many times. He knew exactly how the low gravity affected movement. The 4 Crethans entered the cargo bay, moving slowly. Their 8 legs, which normally gave them perfect balance, became a problem in the weak gravity. They stumbled and struggled to maintain formation. Daniel struck from above. He dropped onto the nearest Crethin, driving a blade made from sharpened hull metal into the gap between its armor plates. Before the others could react, he pushed off and floated to a new position, using the low gravity to move in ways the Crethins couldn't follow. Another Crethin fell. Then another. The last one tried to run. It didn't get far. When it was over, Daniel stood alone in the cargo bay, surrounded by fallen hunters. He wasn't even breathing hard. His face showed no emotion, no satisfaction, no anger. Just calm focus. He picked up a communicator and listened. The Crethin command frequency was filled with confused chatter. They knew something was wrong. 12 of their hunters were now dead, and no one had seen the attacker clearly. Daniel allowed himself a small moment of rest. He leaned against his shipping container and closed his eyes. His body ached, but he pushed the pain aside. There was still work to do. He made his way back to where he had left the others. Torvak had found a small storage room to hide in. When Daniel entered, Leary ran to him immediately, wrapping her small arms around his waist. "You came back," she said, her voice filled with relief. "I told you I would." Orvith stood up slowly, his old joints creaking. He stared at Daniel like he was seeing him for the first time. "How many?" he asked. "6 more. That's 12 total." Torvak's 4 hands were shaking. 12 Crethins. You killed 12 Crethins by yourself. Daniel sat down against the wall. Myra offered him water, and he accepted it gratefully. "There are still more out there," he said, "and they're getting angry." Leary sat beside him, her small body pressed against his arm. She looked up at him with curious eyes. "Why aren't you like the others?" she asked. "The other aliens all ran away. They were so scared." "But you're not running." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke softly. "On my planet, humans weren't always the strongest creatures. We were small compared to many animals. We didn't have sharp claws or thick skin or poison. But we survived anyway. Do you know why?" Leary shook her head. "Because we learned to think. We learned to work together. And we learned something very important." He looked down at her. "We learned that we didn't have to be the strongest to win. We just had to never give up. Never stop. Never quit. No matter how tired we were, no matter how scared, we kept going until the hunt was over." "But the Crethins are so big," Leary whispered. "And there are so many of them." Daniel nodded. "They are big. And there are many. But they've never faced anything like a human before. They don't understand us. They see soft skin and small bodies, and they think we're weak. They don't realize that our greatest weapon isn't in our hands." He tapped his head. "It's here." Orvith listened to every word. He had spent his life studying species across the galaxy, but he had never paid much attention to humans. They were considered primitive, barely worth mentioning in scientific papers. Now he wondered if that had been a terrible mistake. "The Crethins are called apex hunters," Orvith said slowly. "They sit at the top of the food chain on their world. No natural predators, no competition. They believe they are the ultimate hunters in the galaxy." Daniel looked at him. "On Earth, we have a similar concept. We call ourselves apex predators too. But we earned that title differently. We didn't become the dominant species by being born powerful. We became dominant by refusing to be prey." The communicator Daniel had taken crackled with a new transmission. This voice was deeper, angrier. "The Crethin commander. Human. I know you can hear me. I am Vraxis, commander of this hunting party. You have killed my warriors. You have earned my attention." Daniel listened without expression. "But I am not impressed by tricks and shadows," Vraxis continued. "I have taken the station's central atrium. I have 60 civilian prisoners here, children among them. If you do not show yourself within 1 hour, I will execute 10 of them. Then 10 more every hour after that until you surrender." The transmission ended. Leary's eyes filled with tears. "He's going to hurt people." Because of us. Daniel stood up slowly. His face was still calm, but something had changed in his eyes. There was a coldness there now, something ancient and dangerous. No, he said quietly. He's not. Torvik grabbed his arm. You can't go out there. He wants you to show yourself. It's a trap. Daniel looked at him. Of course, it's a trap. But those people out there didn't ask for this. They're innocent. Children are innocent. He gently removed Torvak's hand. Stay here. Keep Leary safe. I'll be back when it's done. Orvith stepped forward. What are you going to do? Daniel walked toward the door. He paused and looked back at them one last time. I'm going to show them what a human really is. Then he disappeared into the darkness, and the hunt entered its final phase. The central atrium of Nexus Prime was the heart of the station. It was a massive open space with a glass ceiling that showed the stars beyond. Normally, it was filled with merchants selling exotic goods, families walking together, and children playing near the decorative fountains. Now it was a prison. Commander Vraxis stood in the center of the atrium, surrounded by his remaining hunters. He had brought 20 of his best warriors to guard the hostages, nearly 60 civilians of various species who huddled together in fear. Among them were children, elderly aliens, and workers who had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Vraxis was larger than the other Crethans, his black armor scarred from countless battles. He had conquered worlds, destroyed armies, and broken the spirits of species that thought they were strong. A single human did not frighten him. It annoyed him. The human has 40 minutes remaining, Vraxis announced to his warriors. If it does not appear, we begin executions as promised. Select the weakest among the prisoners first. Let their screams draw our prey. His hunters clicked their agreement. What they didn't know was that Daniel Carter was already in the atrium. He had entered through the ventilation system, crawling through spaces so narrow that no Crethan could ever fit. He was positioned above the ceiling panels, watching everything through small gaps in the structure. He counted the enemies. 20 hunters, all armed. They were positioned in a circle around the hostages, facing outward. It was a good defensive formation. It meant that attacking from any direction would expose him to multiple weapons. But Daniel wasn't going to attack from any direction they expected. He spent the next 20 minutes moving through the ceiling, placing small devices at key points around the atrium. They were simple things, made from parts he had scavenged during his journey through the station. Power cells connected to light fixtures. Circuit breakers rewired to fail on command. Nothing complex. Just preparation. When he was ready, he made his move. The lights in the atrium flickered once, twice, then died completely. The glass ceiling still let in starlight, but the interior was plunged into deep shadows. Emergency lighting activated a few seconds later, bathing everything in a dim red glow. The Crethan hunters immediately raised their weapons. They scanned the darkness, their multiple red eyes trying to adjust to the sudden change. Stay in formation? Vraxis commanded. It's trying to scare us. We are Crethans. We do not fear the dark. A voice echoed through the atrium. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You wanted a predator. The hunters spun, trying to locate the source. You found one. One of the hunters on the outer edge of the formation suddenly vanished. There was no sound, no struggle. One moment he was there. The next, he was gone. His weapon clattered to the floor. Another hunter turned to look and saw nothing but shadows. When he turned back, the hunter beside him was also gone. Panic began to spread through the Crethan ranks. These were warriors who had never known fear, who had always been the hunters and never the hunted. Now something was picking them off one by one, and they couldn't even see it. Find it. Vraxis roared. Spread out and find it. That was their second mistake. As the formation broke apart, Daniel struck faster. He emerged from shadows, hit hard and precise, and disappeared again before anyone could track him. He didn't fight fairly. He didn't need to. Fair fights were for creatures that had nothing to lose. Daniel had innocent lives depending on him. A hunter fell. Then another. Then 3 more in rapid succession. Raxus fired his weapon wildly into the darkness, hitting nothing but walls and furniture. His remaining hunters were screaming in their own language, calling out warnings that came too late. The hostages watched in stunned silence. They couldn't see clearly what was happening in the shadows, but they heard the sounds. Heavy bodies hitting the floor, weapons clattering against metal, the clicks and hisses of Crethan warriors dying. When the emergency lights stabilized, only Vraxis remained standing. His 20 hunters lay scattered across the atrium floor. Some were dead. Others were unconscious. None of them would be getting up anytime soon. Daniel stepped out of the shadows. He was covered in Crethan blood, which was darker than human blood, almost black in the red light. In his hand he held a blade he had made from whole metal, sharpened to a deadly edge. His clothes were torn, and there were cuts on his arms and face. But he stood straight, and his eyes were calm. Raxus stared at him with disbelief. "You," the commander hissed. "You are just one human. Just one soft, weak little creature. How did you do this?" Daniel didn't answer. He walked toward the Crethan commander slowly, steadily. Raxus raised his weapon. "Stay back. I am Vraxis of the Crethan Empire. I have killed thousands. I have broken worlds." Daniel kept walking. Vraxis fired. Daniel rolled to the side, the blast missing him by centimeters. Before the commander could fire again, Daniel was inside his guard. Too close for the weapon to be useful. The fight was brutal, but short. Vraxis swung his massive arms, trying to crush the human with raw strength. Daniel ducked and weaved, never meeting force with force. Instead, he targeted the joints, the gaps in armor. The nerve points that Orvith's scientific knowledge had mentioned were weaknesses in Crethan. Biology. A strike to the leg joint. Vraxis stumbled, a blade across the arm tendons. The commander's weapon fell. A final blow to the nerve cluster at the base of the skull. Vraxis collapsed, paralyzed but alive. Daniel stood over him, breathing hard but still controlled. The hostages began to stir. Some cried with relief. Others simply stared at the human in shock. Vraxis looked up at Daniel with hatred and confusion. "Kill me," he demanded. "Finish it. That is how hunters settle matters." Daniel shook his head slowly. "No. Why?" Vraxis spat. "You have won. Claim your victory properly." Daniel crouched down so he was eye level with the fallen commander. "I could kill you. It would be easy. Part of me wants to." His voice was quiet, cold. "But I'm not going to. Instead, you're going to live. You're going to go back to your people, and you're going to tell them what happened here." He leaned closer. "Tell them about the station you couldn't conquer. Tell them about the warriors you lost. Tell them about the one soft, weak human who destroyed your entire hunting party." Daniel's eyes locked onto Vraxis's many red ones. "Tell them that humans are not prey. Tell them that we protect the innocent. And tell them what happens when someone threatens our friends." He stood up and walked away from the fallen commander. The hostages parted as he approached, looking at him with wonder and fear. He ignored them. He scanned the crowd until he found what he was looking for. A young Mallory girl with light brown fur and big eyes. She had been among the hostages the whole time. She must have been captured when he wasn't looking. Daniel felt a wave of guilt wash over him, but he pushed it aside. She was safe now. That was what mattered. Leary ran to him and threw her arms around his waist. "You came," she said, her voice thick with tears. "I knew you would come." Daniel knelt down and hugged her back. "I told you I would." Station security finally arrived a few minutes later, a full tactical team that had been fighting their way through the station. They found Daniel sitting calmly among the freed hostages, Leary beside him, his hand resting gently on her head. The security captain stared at the scene of destruction. The fallen Crethans and the single human at the center of it all. What happened here? He asked. Daniel looked up at him with tired eyes. The Crethans made a mistake. They thought they were the predators. He stood up, lifting Leary into his arms. I showed them they were wrong. 3 months passed since the incident on Nexus Prime. News traveled fast across the galaxy. Within days, every major world had heard some version of the story. A Crethan raiding party had attacked a trading station. An entire hunting force had been defeated. The survivors, including the commander himself, had been captured and handed over to galactic authorities. But the most interesting part of the story was the one detail that no one could quite believe. A single human had done it all. News channels ran debates about whether the reports were accurate. Military analysts tried to explain how it was possible. Scientists examined the evidence and came up with theories. Most agreed that the story had been exaggerated, that there must have been a team of trained soldiers, or that the station's defenses had played a bigger role than reported. The Crethan Empire released an official statement denying everything. They claimed the raid had never happened, that Commander Vraxis had retired honorably, and that any stories about a human defeating their warriors were propaganda, designed to insult their honor. But the truth has a way of spreading, no matter how hard powerful people try to hide it. Within the dark corners of the Crethan Empire, a new order was quietly passed down through the ranks. Humans were added to the list of species that were forbidden targets for raids. No explanation was given. None was needed. The hunters who had survived Nexus Prime had already told their stories, and those stories spread like fire through dry grass. On Nexus Prime itself, life slowly returned to normal. The damaged sections of the station were repaired. The cantinas and markets reopened. The families who had been torn apart during the attack began to find each other again. Leary's parents were located on a rescue ship that had fled during the initial assault. The reunion was tearful and beautiful, and Leary refused to let go of her mother for almost an hour. Daniel Carter stayed on the station for a few weeks after the attack. He was questioned by security, interviewed by news channels, and offered rewards that he politely refused. He didn't want money or fame. He just wanted to make sure everyone was safe, and then he wanted to get back to work. When his ship was finally cleared for departure, he walked through the station one last time. The atmosphere had changed. Aliens who had once ignored him now stepped aside as he passed. Some nodded respectfully. Others bowed. A few whispered to each other as he walked by, pointing at the human who had become a legend. Daniel ignored most of it. He didn't do what he did for recognition. He did it because it was right. He stopped at Torvak's cantina. The Celian bartender had become something of a celebrity himself, often telling the story of how he had witnessed the human's transformation from quiet cargo hauler to unstoppable force. "You're leaving," Torvak said when he saw Daniel enter. "Got a job waiting for me in the Outer Rim. Medical supplies again." Torvak reached under the counter and pulled out a bottle of expensive drink. "This one's on me. Actually, everything is on me whenever you're here. For the rest of your life." Daniel smiled slightly. "That's not necessary. It is to me." Torvak poured 2 glasses. "You saved my life. You saved everyone's lives. The least I can do is give you free drinks." They touched glasses and drank. "Can I ask you something?" Torvik said. "Sure. That night, when Kesseth pushed you around, when all those aliens laughed at you, why didn't you fight back? You could have destroyed him easily." Daniel thought about the question for a moment. Fighting him would have proved nothing. He was drunk, arrogant, and looking for an excuse to cause trouble. If I had fought back, people would have been hurt. And for what? To prove that I could beat a bully in a bar fight? He shook his head. That's not strength. That's ego. Real strength is knowing when to fight and when to walk away. I had nothing to prove to Kesseth. But when the Crethans came, when innocent people were in danger, that was different. That was worth fighting for. Torvik nodded slowly. You humans are strange creatures. I've lived a long life, met many species. I thought I understood the galaxy, but I never understood your kind until now. We're not that complicated, Daniel said. We just don't like seeing innocent people get hurt, especially children. The door to the cantina opened and a small figure rushed in. Leary ran across the room and crashed into Daniel's legs with a fierce hug. You weren't going to leave without saying goodbye, were you? She demanded. Daniel crouched down to her level. I was coming to find you next. Leary looked at him with serious eyes. I made you something? She reached into her bag and pulled out a piece of paper. On it, she had drawn a picture with colored pencils. It showed a tall human figure standing with arms spread wide, protecting a group of smaller figures behind him. Above the picture, she had written a word in 3 different alien languages. Guardian. Daniel single quotes, throat tightened. It's beautiful, Leary. That's you, she said, pointing at the human figure. You're the Guardian. My guardian. Daniel folded the picture carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket, close to his heart. I'll keep this forever. Orvith appeared in the doorway, watching the scene with thoughtful eyes. He had spent the past 3 months revising everything he thought he knew about humans. His new research paper was already causing waves in scientific circles across the galaxy. I have something for you as well, Orvith said, walking over. He handed Daniel a small data chip. It's a copy of my paper. I wanted you to see it before it's published. Daniel took the chip. What's it about? Humans. Orvith smiled slightly. More specifically, it's about the fundamental misunderstanding the galaxy has had about your species. We saw your soft skin and assumed weakness. We saw your small size and assumed vulnerability. We never looked deeper. He placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Your species didn't become dominant on your world through strength. You became dominant through persistence, adaptability, and an unshakable will to protect your own. You are, perhaps, the most dangerous kind of predator the galaxy has ever seen. Not because you are powerful, but because you never give up. And because you will sacrifice everything to protect the ones you love. Daniel didn't know what to say. He simply nodded. The news of Orvith's paper spread quickly. Within months, the Galactic Council began serious discussions about Earth's formal integration into galactic politics. A Mallory ambassador, whose niece had been saved during the Nexus Prime attack, gave an emotional speech about the human who had risked everything to protect strangers. The vote passed. Earth would be offered full council membership, but Daniel Carter didn't know any of that yet. He was back on his ship, hauling cargo through quiet space, watching stars drift past his window. The life of a cargo hauler wasn't glamorous, but it was peaceful. It gave him time to think, time to breathe, time to just exist. His communicator buzzed with an incoming message. He glanced at the screen and smiled. It was a video from Larry. In it, she was laughing, holding up a test paper with a high mark. Her mother was visible in the background, waving at the camera. I got the highest grade in my class, Leary announced proudly. My teacher says I'm the smartest student she's ever had. I wanted to tell you first. I miss you, Guardian. Come visit soon, okay? The video ended. Daniel set it to replay and leaned back in his chair. The stars outside were endless, cold, and beautiful. Somewhere out there, trillions of aliens lived their lives, built their societies, and told their stories. Most of them would never hear of Daniel Carter. Most of them would never know what happened on Nexus Prime. But some would. And those who did would remember. They would remember that humans were not what they appeared to be. They would remember that the soft creatures from the little blue planet were not prey. They would remember that when the innocent were threatened, when children cried out for help, there was no predator more devoted, no guardian more relentless than a human being. Daniel closed his eyes and listened to Leary's laughter one more time. Then he set his course for the next job and flew on into the endless dark. Just another cargo hauler among the stars. But the galaxy would never see him the same way again.